Emily Sollows. She is the Communications and Assistant Operations for the Bluenose II and Bluenose 100. And she's going to now give you some of the information about the Bluenose in case you didn't know the whole story, and also what's happening with their celebrations this year. So over to you, Emily.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Pam. I'm just going to share my screen here. Pam, can you see that okay?
Yep.
All right, wonderful. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We're really excited to share the story of Bluenose and Bluenose II with you all, and how we're celebrating this big centennial year. So we'll just start with a brief history of Bluenose. And the story really starts a year before Bluenose was even built. Some of you may have heard of the America's Cup. It's a popular race, an international sailing race. Well, the 1920 America's Cup was canceled due to high winds and high swell, but onlookers and other vessels thought the conditions were fine that day. The problem was, as you can kind of tell from this photo, the boats were quite fragile and the owners didn't want any damage done. People were highly unimpressed. So these were the days of the Grand Banks fishery. Schooners would sail from ports all along the eastern seaboard and beyond to the Grand Banks, which is one of the richest fishing grounds in the world, situated just off the coast of Newfoundland. These schooners would often have unofficial races back to port, as the first schooner back would typically get the highest price for their catch. And these fishermen sailed in any and all conditions: fog, high winds, heavy rain, even chipping ice off the rigging in April. So amidst the disappointment of the 1920s America's Cup race cancellation, there was a public call for a race for real sailors, i.e. schooner fishermen who sailed the North Atlantic and who weren't afraid of some higher winds and heavier seas and maybe a torn sail here and there. Senator William Dennis put up the International Fisherman's Trophy, pictured here, and a $5,000 prize, which I looked up recently, and that's equal to about $69,000 today. So it's a pretty significant cash prize as well. Schooners had to be bona fide fishing vessels with real fishermen, no yachts or special racing crews allowed. Nova Scotia held elimination races to choose their fastest schooner, and they called on Gloucester, Massachusetts to send their best of the fleet. And the dueling ships met in Halifax, October 1920. Now this race was the best 2 out of 3. So the American schooner Esperanto easily beat Canadian schooner Delawana in the first 2 races. You can actually see the lead on the American schooner has in this photo here. This is the Canadian schooner. You can just kind of see it there in the background. When the American ship sailed home with the trophy, they actually sent a broom up the mast indicating the sweep they'd given the Canadians. So this was very embarrassing to Nova Scotians, as it was their idea for the race in the first place. However, it said that plans were being made to build a new Canadian schooner before Delawana even crossed the finish line that day. So they formed a committee and they put out a call for designs. William J. Ruey was a young naval architect from Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, who until then had only designed much smaller boats. And it was his design that was accepted, and they began work immediately on this new Canadian contender at the Smith & Rulin Shipyard in Lunenburg. It was simply known at the time as Hull number 119. The shipbuilders worked from December to March, so in the winter months, outdoors, using only hand tools, and they built this schooner in just 96 days. Local Lunenburg schooner captain Angus Walters was chosen as captain, and it said that he watched over the build like a worried parent. Now, one question we often get is, where did the name Bluenose come from? Nova Scotians have been referred to as Bluenosers for centuries, since the late 1700s. First, I'll tell you my favorite theory, and that is that fishermen wore blue mittens when they were out fishing, and they would wipe their noses in the cold, and the dye would turn their noses blue. And while this is a lovely image of the name's origin, it's highly unlikely, as the fishermen were pretty superstitious, and it was bad luck to wear colored mittens aboard vessels. So it's more likely that the name came from these little blue potatoes from the Annapolis Valley. They're shaped like little noses and transported around the province and beyond. It was once kind of a derogatory term, but it became a term of endearment for Nova Scotians and very popular in businesses' names as it remains today. So when choosing a name for a schooner to represent Nova Scotia, this seemed like a perfect fit as it represented all Nova Scotians as opposed to naming the ship after the captain or the owner's wife, which was pretty common practice at the time. Thousands of spectators showed up to watch Bluenose slide into the Lunenburg Harbor for the first time, March 26th, 1921. I think I heard somewhere that it was 3 times the population of Lunenburg that was on the shore that day. But of course, she had to complete a full fishing season on the Grand Banks in order to qualify for the international fishermen's races. So she was rigged and ready to go in just 2 weeks. Now, unlike fishing boats today, these fishermen did not actually fish from the deck of the ship. They would launch these little yellow boats called dories, and then they would fork the fish onto the mothership upon their return. And it was a really rough life. They would work from 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning until 9 or 10 o'clock every night, every day except for Sundays. They had no running water. They often shared bunks, and they even would sometimes sleep in their rain gear in case all hands were called. But Bluenose earned her keep as a fishing schooner throughout her entire racing career and was even a highliner in Lunenburg, meaning she held the record for the highest catch. So these fishing seasons were typically about 6 months long. So in October, after she had completed a full fishing season, the crew immediately started preparing for the races and offloading their fishing gear. Bluenose's very first race was against the Gloucester schooner Elsie. Bluenose won the first race by 12 minutes, and the second race, she finished a whopping 3 miles ahead of her competitor. The second photo here, you can see part of Elsie's mast actually snapped. And this is a very common theme in these races: spars breaking, lines snapping, sails ripping in half. So clearly these fellas were not afraid to push their vessels to the max. And here's the captain, Angus Walters, with the trophy on the deck of Bluenose after that first win. People were ecstatic after Bluenose won her first race. Now, to take you back to the early 1920s, the First World War had recently ended. The Halifax explosion was just 3 years prior. There was post-war economic recession. People were still grappling with the impacts of the Spanish flu pandemic. On top of that, industry was rapidly changing, and the future of these tall sailing ships was uncertain amid the more reliable steamship. Also, Canada was still a very young nation, so people really rallied around these races as a national victory, and they were really proud of Bluenose and the country that she represented. And Bluenose came to embody the hard work and resilience of Canadians. These victories, of course, also thrust working class fishermen into more elite social circles they otherwise never would have been a part of, which was a part of the Bluenose story that Canadians loved. The following year, 1922, Bluenose went to Gloucester to compete against the newly built Henry Ford, built with the purpose to beat Bluenose. But Bluenose won the series and the cup remained in Canada. Now in 1923, the next year, Captain Angus met his match in Captain Ben Pine. He was the skipper of the American schooner Columbia. There was no clear winner in this series as Bluenose passed a buoy on the wrong side and was disqualified. But Angus Walters was so irritated at the technicality that he sailed home to Lunenburg, and it would be 7 years before they raced again. So the races were revived in 1931. Bluenose raced again. This time they entered their newest schooner, the Gertrude L. Thibault, also under the command of Captain Ben Pine. Gloucester was still building these vessels to try to beat Bluenose. It was a close race, but Bluenose defeated the Thibault, and the trophy remained in Canada. So Bluenose was now nicknamed the Queen of the North Atlantic. She became an icon and a point of pride for Canadians almost instantly after that 1921 victory. The ship was placed on the postage stamp in 1929 and on the Canadian dime in 37. She kind of became an ambassador of Canada. She represented the country at the Chicago World Fair and even sailed across to England for King George's Silver Jubilee. She actually opened in 1932 for public charters because people wanted to sail on board. And this photo here was taken in Gloucester, which really gives you a sense of how popular Bluenose was, even in her competition's home port. In the fall of 1938, the two most renowned bank schooners faced off against each other again, the Bluenose and the Gertrude L. Thibault. But Bluenose was 17 years old at this point, which is quite old for a working wooden schooner. And she was really starting to show her age. It was acknowledged that these would be the last international fishermen's races. The age of sail was well over this point, and the few bank schooners that were remaining were also showing their age. But the two schooners were neck and neck throughout the race, despite that age difference. And in a cutthroat tiebreaker, the Bluenose beat the Thibault by less than 3 minutes, and the cup remained in Canada. And you can actually still see the International Fisherman's Trophy. It's on display at the Fisheries Museum of the Atlantic here in Lunenburg. Just 1 year after that glorious victory in 1939, Bluenose was tied up and she was out of work. Efforts to save the Bluenose failed, and Angus Walters, the captain, ended up paying $7,000 of his own money at the last minute to prevent her from being sold at auction. However, World War II came around and shut down the North Atlantic sea lanes, and the Banks fishery collapsed completely. Angus was forced to sell Bluenose to the West Indies Trading Company in 1942, so she would be sold to carry cargo throughout the Caribbean. I've heard this story that he went down to the dock alone that day to cast off her lines and see Bluenose off. And you can really imagine his grief watching her sail away. Shortly after that, he said, "We've seen a lot together in fair weather and in foul, and the Bluenose was like part of me." So he knew he'd likely never see her again. In 1946, she was carrying a load of bananas and rum between Caribbean islands. She struck a reef off the coast of Haiti and sank. Fast forward 14 years, 1960, the Smith and Rowland Shipyard built a replica of the HMS Bounty for the movie Mutiny on the Bounty. People thought if they could build another Bounty, surely they could build another Bluenose. At the same time, Olin Brewery was looking for a mascot for their schooner lager. So they had Bluenose II built to promote their schooner beer and to act as a floating ambassador of Nova Scotia. The original designer, William Ruey, and Captain Angus Walters were consulted on the build. And some shipwrights who worked on the original Bluenose also helped build Bluenose II. Bluenose II was launched July 24th, 1963, and Captain Angus even sailed on her maiden voyage. Today, Bluenose II is owned by the province of Nova Scotia and operated by the Lunenburg Marine Museum Society, which operates both Bluenose II and the Fisheries Museum of the Atlantic. As Nova Scotia's sailing ambassador, Bluenose II sails around the Maritimes and the eastern seaboard, usually making a stop in Gloucester, Massachusetts each season when possible. Occasionally, the ship will travel further up into the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes. And the purpose is promoting Nova Scotia and our province's maritime heritage. And every few years, Bluenose II will take part in tall ships events, the last one being the 2019 Great Lakes Challenge. Bluenose II sailed almost as far as Chicago and had over 110,000 people across the decks. In a regular season, Bluenose II, we offer 2-hour harbor tours twice a day, mostly in Lunenburg, but also in Halifax and in other ports around Nova Scotia. In between tours and in the evenings, we open the decks to the public for deck tours. We also offer an experience called Deckhand for a Day, where we set out to sea with a small group of people, and they get to scrub the decks, polish the brass, they get to set sails, drop the anchor, steer the ship. They get to do everything a crew member does. Due to the pandemic in 2020, and again this year, the ship was not able to tie up in any port except Lunenburg. So instead of regular operations, the ship set out on a sail past summer, sailing by and anchoring in ports around Nova Scotia, as well as parts of PEI and New Brunswick. Lots and lots of people turned out in boats. People would wave from the shores. We had a huge response on social media. So the plan is for Bluenose II to do this again this year to promote Bluenose 100. And they'll be setting sail in a couple of weeks, early June. So if you're in the Maritimes, check out the Bluenose II schedule on our website and see where you can see the ship this summer. Or follow along virtually by following us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're at Sail Bluenose II. And I'll drop a link to this in the chat later on. Now, how have we been celebrating this big Bluenose centennial? We kicked off our virtual programming on March 26th, of course, to celebrate the centennial of the launching. We have weekly live streams every Thursday afternoon on the Bluenose 100 Facebook and YouTube channel. Some exciting ones coming up this summer. We're going to be doing a cooking class with the Kilted Chef, who's a well-known chef around here. And he'll be doing some modern day versions of traditional salt banker recipes. We'll also soon be airing a virtual tour of Bluenose II, including a tour of below decks, which isn't open to the public. We'll be doing a tour of the Fisheries Museum's brand new Bluenose exhibit, and we'll be live streaming some local musicians singing songs of the sea and much more. We have lots of local and national partnerships as well. So Mint has released some new Bluenose commemorative coins. Canada Post is releasing a new stamp next month. A couple of local breweries around here have released a special Bluenose beer to commemorate the 100th. And you can visit our website for more information on that. It's bluenose100.ca, and follow Bluenose 100 on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. That's all I have for now. So I'll throw it back over to you, Pam. Thanks everyone for listening. Are you there, Pam?
She's going off to get some lobster for supper.
Oh. Sorry. Sorry about that. Is that better?
I can hear you now.
Okay, great. So as Emily mentioned, who by the way is a great storyteller and she knows her Bluenose inside out, obviously. She mentioned that some of the touch points that you can access the Bluenose or learn a little bit more about her, or where we actually use that name across the province. So she made reference to the fact that you can sail on her in normal times, and hopefully we'll be back to that next year, in harbor cruises in Nova Scotia or any ports that she visits. Try being a deckhand for a day. I would highly recommend that too. Also, we have several new packages that are starting up this year to celebrate the Bluenose and the 100th. For instance, there's one that's called the Bluenose Celebration Sail and Stay, which is actually with a private charter out of the Mahone Bay area. And you spend 2 days on that navigating around Lunenburg, Mahone Bay, the very waters that the Bluenose would have found herself traveling in as well, including a meal and an overnight stay at a B&B in Lunenburg. Also the Celebrate Bluenose Staycation and the 2-night stay in Lunenburg and with breakfast. And then also they have provided kind of a cheat sheet of the various Bluenose touch points that you can find in and around the Lunenburg area. And then the Escape to Lunenburg to celebrate the Bluenose is with the Brigantine Inn and the Grand Banker Inn in Lunenburg, including accommodation, a craft brewery tour and tasting, a dining certificate for the Grand Banker. And even though they don't have a burger named the Bluenose, I highly recommend the Lunenburger, which is a great beef patty topped with lobster knuckles and claws, and smoked cheddarwood cheese. And then on top of all that is a bacon wrapped scallop. So no wonder I love it. Also, as we mentioned, is the Fisheries Museum of the Atlantic that's found on the Lunenburg waterfront. They have 3 levels of all things related to the fisheries in and around Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada, but in particular, you can see their enhanced exhibit about the Bluenose. So if you want to see the cup itself, if you want to sit in on their movie version of the story and see some of the more pictures, some more of the pictures like Emily has shown, that's the place to go. And just opening this year is the new big boat shop. So it's on kind of at the other end of the waterfront from the Fisheries Museum, but this is where the restoration of the Bluenose would have taken place, as well as being home to the building of many others as well. So you actually can go into the facility now, you can see what they're working on and learn about the craftsmanship that takes to build these magnificent wooden structures. Lunenburg Walking Tours in Lunenburg is offering a Bluenose 100th walking tour in celebration of the anniversary this year. So obviously they're going to provide more information and tidbits and the touch points about the Bluenose as you walk around the town of Lunenburg, beginning at the big boat shed and making your way down to the Fisheries Museum. It also includes seeing actually the model launch that they do of a Bluenose boat launch, Bluenose boat model there. So some eats and treats related to Bluenose II. Of course, we have to have some culinary components to this. There's a coffee roaster called the Laughing Whale in Lunenburg that makes the Bluenose brew. There's Ironworks Distillery who have their award-winning Bluenose rum, and it's actually used to make the Lunenburg rum cakes that are offered now. Shipwright Brewing has produced the Bluenose Lager, as has Salt Bucks with their Bluenose 100 Commemorative Ale. Maritime Express Cider Company, it's actually in the valley, they have the Flying Bluenose. Technically, that was the name of the train, but anything with Bluenose on it we'll take. And also within the Lunenburg Rum Cakes Company, they make a dark chocolate bark that they have called the Bluenose Drive Bark. And Emily made reference to the fact that there's various places that you can find the Bluenose. She is on our license plate here. There have been several stamps that have been issued in her honor, as well as Captain Angus. Of course, she's on the back of her dime, and she will continue to be so as long as we have our say. Stan Rogers actually wrote a song entitled The Bluenose, and can be found on a couple of his albums and CDs if you look for them. And ironically, the Bluenose and Captain Angus Walters were actually the first, she was the first non-human to be inducted in the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame in 1955. So all these adds up to being pretty proud of her. As Emily made reference to, even the Canadian Mint has recognized her significance and the anniversary this year, and they have issued some commemorative coins, which can be found on their site. And there are various price points, but they're actually quite beautiful. I have seen the set in person, really nice. So without further ado, you didn't come here to listen to me. You came here to listen to the expert on all things related to the Bluenose II. He's been with her for as long as I've been doing this, this particular gig. And in my opinion, probably one of the nicest South Shore representatives you're ever going to meet. So I'm very pleased to welcome Captain Phil Watson to the screen.
Thank you, Pam. If you want to know how bad the lockdown is, then you can just listen to Pam's introduction of me. She needs to get out some more, I think. Oh, wow. So picture on the left there is me. I must be 21 years old, I guess, and I am so shy I can't even make eye contact with the camera. That's incredible. So this is, as Pam said, I've been on the ship for a long time. This is my 35th year answering the call to come and show up in the spring. The photo on the right is how I look now. I'm much greater than I was when I started. Yeah, so I had done some sailing before I started on the ship. I've been captain on a small harbor tour schooner here in Lunenburg, and I made my first my first on a schooner when I was 16 years old and went from here in Lunenburg all the way up the Great Lakes system to Tawas, Michigan. So I think as a 16-year-old kid, I was on it right away. Yeah. Today, you know, I'm I guess a professional mariner. So my day today ran from everything from discussing a computer board inside a long range radio with a technician to, you know, mentoring young people and leading the young crew that have never sailed before, and they come on the ship. And I made that journey myself. I started as a guy that didn't know anything, and you know, in 2001, I guess they promoted me to captain and let me be responsible for the ship. That's quite a journey, and I love to say, you know, people ask me how you get to be the captain, and the first step is to clean a toilet, because you have to start at the bottom on a ship like Bluenose. There's no model that you can go to and learn all the details of it. So you've got to start at the very bottom and work the way to the top. And I've been very blessed to do that, and I'm quite happy to have my career. I always say I'm the luckiest guy in Lunenburg, and the luckiest guy in Canada. It's me and the guy that looks after the Stanley Cup, and the two of us have these icons that we look after, and we are blessed in our careers. All right, next slide. Life on board. So although the camera always tends to flatten out the waves, I took this picture last year. I guess the seas were probably sort of 15 feet at that stage, maybe got a little bit bigger. People often think of Bluenose as a harbor tour schooner and you know, picture us milling about the harbor, but the fact is that we do take Bluenose to the sea. When we go to sea, that means that we're at sea at night, we're at sea in storms. We experience all the weather that the Nova Scotia coast has to offer, and the Great Lakes squalls and the St. Lawrence Seaway squalls as well. So Bluenose is actually a seagoing schooner. We do many of the same things that Captain Angus and his crew would have done 100 years ago, and we're subject to the same conditions. We have hot water for showers. That's lovely, and an electric cook stove, and that looks after us. So there are many pluses. The life for the crew is difficult. They start April 1st, often in the snow here in Nova Scotia. And we spend 2 months putting the ship back together from our winter storage. Crew get very few days off. They work long hours. They work 12 hours a day usually. And we varnish and paint and scrape everything from the waterline to the top of the masts. I see a question just flew by there. If we ever fished from the ship, we often do. We fish for mackerel when we're along the coast. And if we're deep sea, we sometimes fish for tuna, looking for a little yellowfin tuna, maybe 2 feet long or something, and something like that would feed the whole crew for a meal. So that's always a welcome break. Next slide. Selecting the crew. This is a really difficult thing to do. Our crew have mostly zero sailing experience. They may have been out on a family yacht, some of them on a canoe, some of them have never seen the ocean before. Largely Nova Scotian, probably 70 or 80% Nova Scotian. So we have an interview process. We put in, young people put in their interviews and resumes. And this year, I think we had 100 and some applications, a few over 100. So we do a resume review, and then we sit down and talk with the people that we think might be good candidates. So it's often the chief mate, myself, and the director of operations, Ann Bailey. We sit down and we are looking for people that will be good shipmates and good representatives of the province. It's hard to know what somebody's going to be like when they're, haven't had enough sleep for 3 weeks in a row, or if they're half seasick, or if they're missing home. So that's a really challenging thing for us. So when I do my interview process, I have all kinds of crazy questions where I'm trying to find out the person, and I'm looking for a spark, some kind of their ability to have a good conversation with me. And usually I figure if I can bring a spark, if they have a spark about something, then I can talk to them, then they can develop a spark about the ship, and all I have to do is fan the flames. The crew are made up. There's 6 of us that are full-time. There's myself as captain, chief engineer, a chief mate, a second mate, a bosun, and the most important man, of course, is the cook. And then 14 young people. So this year we have 6 new, have never been on board before. There's a couple coming back for their 2nd year, 1 for their 3rd, and 1 for their 4th year. It's a fine-edged thing between having so many people come back and making my life easy, everybody knows what to do, and giving as many young people from across Canada the chance to sail on the ship and to go out and tell their communities the story of the ship, and balancing that skill level and ability to have as many young people aboard is really interesting. I see the question about physical requirements. Not really. You have to be in good physical shape. You have to be able to pass a Transport Canada Marine Medical. Most of the game for us is mental game, that you have to be able to live in really tight quarters. You have to be able to get along with people. Yeah, it's a big mental game. And so good shipmates are, as we have all found out during COVID, good people to be close down with. They make life a lot easier. Next slide. The Bluenose has many roles, and it's a really interesting one for me, a really interesting question. Emily alluded to us going into the Great Lakes. So there, I think we had, millions of social media views. We had 100,000 people across the deck. And when we go there, we are promoting Nova Scotia as a destination, and we're telling the story of it from a historical perspective. When we come home, we expect to see that those people will follow us in the next year or two, come back to Nova Scotia. And then our job then is a multifaceted. One is to get the people to come out of the city, to come to the small ports. That's the heart of Nova Scotia, is these small communities that surround the coast. So we can actually double the population of a small town when we come into a tall town. People will follow us. They'll base their vacations around what we do. That's a really interesting thing. And when we meet people from wherever they've come from and they've been chasing the ship and they finally catch us and come on board, I hear wonderful stories of the places that they've been finding, and the beaches they've gone to, and the restaurants they've eaten at while they've come to see us. Other really interesting part that we do is we provide sort of a lens for the community and culture to be shared. So the boat becomes a meeting place in these small communities, and it allows tourists to meet the locals in a historic atmosphere. And that we can do that in different town along the coast, as opposed to being one place where maybe the locals don't go. Maybe the locals don't go to the local museum or to the local tourist room, but we can be there, and everybody comes to see us. So there's a great intermingling of people on the deck of the ship. Next slide. The Bluenose 100 Sail Pass Tour. Last year was a real, we didn't know what to expect. I don't think anybody did. This is something that we hadn't done before. So we sort of poked our noses out and realized that as we were going up and down along the coast, that the locals were coming to see us. And I think last year and this 100th year, we sort of took the boat from being a tourist boat to being a locals boat. It was really interesting. We had really interesting conversations with locals about the history of their towns and what they thought the Bluenose meant to them. Often we don't see a lot of locals on the ship unless they have people visiting, and they will bring visitors to the ship to show them the ship. But like all of us, we'd quite often rather drive 1,000 miles to look at someone else's museum than drive the 2 minutes to go see our own stuff. So that's to be expected. I think this year, when we look at the 100th, we have a chance to tell Angus's story again and make sure that it's current. And it's interesting with our young people, you know, to look at their lives compared to 100 years ago or 80 years ago. That's a neat way to look at your life now and to look at how you feel about life and what challenges ahead and what the challenges were behind you. And history is always a good thing to learn. It's good to go ahead with your feet firmly pushed on the ground. Next slide. So the question that's often asked of me, why is Bluenose important? Why is Bluenose II important? So Bluenose II is, to me, as a tourist draw and as an economic driver, you know, it's an obvious thing. People come to harbor tours and to see Lunenburg and UNESCO World Heritage Site. But if I ask somebody the name of a harbor tour boat in Toronto or Vancouver or Halifax, you probably can't tell me, but you should be able to tell me the name of Bluenose, and that's important. Bluenose can be a lens for maritime history, so you can look at where did the wood come from in the Bluenose, where did the blacksmithing, where did the coal come from, where were the sails made, how did these things get moved around? The masts from the original Bluenose came from the West Coast. They're Douglas fir tree, 100 feet long. So you can imagine the trip in 1920 for a 100-foot tree to come from the West Coast to the East Coast. So then you can look at the railways and you can look at the logging industry in the West Coast. And I think when you have a thing like the Bluenose, a historical artifact, or like Bluenose II, you can use that as a way to access history, any kind of history. You can look at what was going on in the 20s, what was going on in the 30s and 40s, and look at Angus's life and the life of his crew and the life here in Lunenburg and see how that is reflected throughout Canada and throughout the Eastern United States. It's a great tool. It's a great learning tool. And she's fun to sail. So as a tourist draw, that is absolutely worthwhile. And when I come back into Lunenburg with a deck load of tourists and we turn around Battery Point and the town of Lunenburg unfolds, that is an incredible sight. That site hasn't changed in 100 years. So there you go. That's my story. That's what I have to say. I'd be happy to answer questions or talk about what it is. I see a question went by about the ratio of men to women on the ship. It's about 50-50. Our two top women here in the office are.
Oops.
Yeah, muted.
Sorry, Phil, sorry, I accidentally muted you. Phil, can you unmute yourself? Sorry, there.
I have that technical ability.
There we go. Sorry about that. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
No.
Any questions? Anybody have? Feel free to unmute yourselves and pop on.
Yeah. Hey, hi Pam. No, I was just curious about her top speed because I was curious when somebody said they went over. Now I know it was the original when she went over for George V's commemoration, whatever that was. What's her top sailing speed these days? So
her hull speed is about 14 knots. You can get a little bit more than that if you heel it over.
Right.
So 14 knots would be like 25, 26 kilometers an hour.
Yeah.
So the physics of the situation say if someone tells you that they were doing 20 knots, that probably didn't happen, or that they were falling down a huge wave.
Thanks.
Anybody else? We also know how to get a hold of Captain Phil anytime. So if there's any burning questions, by all means, feel free to send them. You can also follow them along on Facebook and Twitter, correct, Emily?
Yes, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're at Sail Bluenose II, and Bluenose 100 is at Bluenose_100.
Great. Trust me, I've had the privilege of being at several events with the Captain Phil, and he has many more stories that he could tell. But I actually just want to ask one myself, Phil. For me,
Sure.
tell me, what's one of your most memorable experiences from your years with the Bluenose?
For me, it's always sailing. I grew up in a small town not far from here called Mahone Bay. You probably know it from 3 churches on the water. And I grew up sailing a small dinghy there. So for me to take the Bluenose back into that water, and I can picture myself as a 10-year-old kid sailing around in a dinghy, and I come back in the Bluenose. That's a life well lived, and I love that feeling. And we go back probably every couple of years to my little town, and yeah, that's a super thing for me.
Cool. It's a good thing. It's very handy. It is indeed. So we're starting to wrap up unless anyone has any other burning questions. But before we go, I have one more thing I want to share with you here. Just one second here. And we obviously don't want to let anybody go away without providing some goodies. I will admit, I am blown away by all of you that have taken the time to join us today with the numbers that are on here. And I wish we had the resources to send a little something to everybody, but you never know. The financial gods may open up someday. But in the meantime, Emily has graciously offered to give away 5 $100 gift certificates to the Bluenose II company store online. So we will follow up with that information to our lucky recipients, and that you will be able to go on and pick out anything you want. I myself, it's hard to see, but it's become one of my favorites. I have the Bluenose 100 long sleeve t-shirt, and I've been wearing it out nonstop. It's really comfortable. But I'm going to make you do a little bit of work for that. So it's a bit of a trivia. 5 questions, and if you've been paying attention, you should be able to get them. And I encourage everyone to send me your answers and be honest. But at the same time, I also know what we're like, and we're busy. So I will randomly be picking 5 people from who attended today, and we'll be in touch with the lucky recipients. But before we wrap up, let's see if you can remember some of these answers. So which shipyard built the Bluenose? A, Smith & Weston Shipyard, B, Smith & Ruland, C, McGill Shipyard, or D, Mosier Shipyard?
B.
B. Very good, Jim. Very good. It is the Smith & Ruland, as both Captain Phil and Emily have talked about. She's built more than 270 vessels over her years. And interesting to note, Audrey Smith, which was the daughter of the shipbuilder Richard Smith, was actually the one who christened the Bluenose on her launch day. Yes. Question number 2, how much did it cost to build the Bluenose from 1920 to 21? 10 million, 3.5 million, 530,000, or $35,000? I should do the extra Well, the answer is $35,000, which doesn't seem like a whole lot today, but probably I think it's equivalent to roughly at least $500,000 today, if not more. And most of that money was raised by sponsors who incorporated themselves as the Bluenose Schooner Company. So kind of early form of crowd fundraising. Most of those were sold shares, and they were mostly in Lunenburg, Halifax, and a few other parts of Canada. Question number 3, how long did it take to complete the construction of the Bluenose? 2 years, a year, a few months, or 8 weeks?
Few months. 96 days.
A few months is correct. As Emily said, she had to be built fast and furiously in order to get her a year of fishing under her belt before she could compete in the competitions. So she started late 1920, and as we said, was launched on March 26, 1921. This is a tricky one. Who was invited to drive the ceremonial first spike into the Bluenose? The Governor General of Canada at the time, the Prime Minister, the Premier, or all of the above?
All of the above.
I'm going to put Phil on the spot. Can Captain Phil answer this one?
Oh, probably not. I'll say the Governor General of Canada.
Oh, like you were trying to fool us. It was the Governor General of Canada. And interesting to note that he actually happened to be passing through Nova Scotia on another function. So he was invited to attend, and it's believed that, well, he was enjoying himself just a little bit too much at the prior function, and he had some trouble driving that spike in. So after a few swings, someone else had to step in and give him a helping hand with that. And last but not least, name another famous ship built in Nova Scotia and Lunenburg. So the
Bounty.
The Bounty, the HMS Surprise, or all of the above?
All of the above.
Bounty.
It's all of
the Bounty.
All of the above.
All of the above. All the above have been built in Lunenburg. So the other two is movie replicas, but of course the Bluenose II as well.
Pam, I sailed on a passing cloud, the sister ship.
See, there you go. Yes. So well done. I'm very proud of all you who are paying attention. Well done, at least. So I am going to wrap up once again by thanking Emily and Captain Phil for joining us this afternoon. And thank you guys for joining us as well. As always, you can keep in touch with us at novascotia.com, or you guys all know me. You can find me wherever there's a lobster to be found. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, by all means, please feel free to contact me at any time. And have a good night. And I really hope we can see you soon and in person sometime really, really soon.
Stay well, everybody. Good luck.
Take care. Good night.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
Thank
you,
Pam.
Thanks, Captain Phil.
Thanks, Pam.
Thanks, Captain.